Today is May 23rd, 2008. I am Cassie Potasic, and it is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Eureka, South Dakota. Can you please tell me your full name?
Selma Lapp.
And what's your maiden name?
Job, J-O-B.
Do you have a middle name?
No, I don't.
Right. When and where were you born?
Born out on the farm in 1927. You need my birthday, August 19th, 1927.
Have you ever heard any interesting stories about your birth?
Yes, my mother miscarried the first two children she had, when they were not viable. So when she became pregnant with me, Dr. Gurdis, a wise old doctor, told her not to do any kind of work. She had to have a maid through all of her pregnancy. She carried me to term, and when she started going to labor, Dad had to drive to Eureka because there were no phones, so he had to drive to Eureka to get Dr. Gurdis, but they also had a midwife there. So by the time Dad brought Dr. Gurdis, the midwife had delivered me, and I was fine. Then she miscarried one other time, another daughter, 2 years after I was born, and she died, but she was born in the Eureka Hospital, and she still died because she was too young. Then she had 4 more children after that, and they all survived.
Right. Can you please share some of your earliest memories with us?
Like going to school and...
Just what's the first thing you remember of your whole life?
Boy, that's hard to... First thing that I remember. Well, I remember when the thrashing crew would come to our farm, and it was the Jacober thrashing crew, and I must have been about 4 or 5 years old, and there's this one of the sons was always so playful, and I just worshipped him because he carried me from the barn to the house and so on. So that's one thing I remember. And I remembered my dad loved horseshoes, so they would play horseshoes in the dark because there were no, yard lights or anything. So they would tie white ribbon on the stakes so they could see the stakes, and then they throw the horseshoes in the dark. And of course, my parents were always, when we were growing up, after the work was done, after I got a little older, we'd play baseball. Mom would be out there too with us, and Dad, and play baseball in the yard. Dad always had a swing for us in the barn. Put one up on the rafters, and we could swing in the barn. And, gosh. Oh, I do have a... Now, I don't know if this is a true memory, but when my mother miscarried with his daughter after I was born, I was a little over 2 years old, and now maybe my mom told me this, or maybe I just remembered walking through this dark hall of the hospital into my mother's room. And my mother would always tell me this, that I did this, and I'd say, "Mama, come under the bed," which means, "Mom, you come into your own bed," or come into a different bed. I didn't like her in the hospital bed. Now, do I really remember this, or is it because she told me that I had said this to her? I'm not sure. But I have just a kind of a visual memory of going through this dark hall to my mother's room in the hospital. So that's school memories. Yeah, we had so many. We went to country school, and I think my first grade there were 26 children in one room, one teacher, all eight grades. I remember one time got into a fight with one of the neighbor kids in school, or I thought we were in a fight, and he said he's going to beat me up the next day. So I was prepared for him, and they tell me I got the best of him. I'm not sure whether I did or not.
Were you disciplined if you got in fights at school?
Well, no, because this was, it wasn't a big fight or anything like that. It was just verbally, and then of course the next day he said he was going to beat me up, and then no, I don't think we were ever disciplined because it wasn't that serious at that time.
Okay. Can you describe the schoolhouse where you went?
One-room schoolhouse, lots of windows on the east side, no indoor bathroom, no water. We had to carry our own water to school, and of course our lunch buckets and all that. And use the bathroom outdoors.
What would you bring for lunch?
Whatever my mother fixed. I remember especially in the fall having fresh tomatoes and a drumstick, cold chicken, and whatever else, sandwiches or whatever.
And what would you bring it to school in?
Dinner pail, what we called a dinner pail. And the water, I don't remember how we carried that. Maybe in a syrup can or something like that. I'm not sure. I don't remember that. But I remember Dad taking us to, my mother would, in the wintertime, we had so much snow during those years, it seemed like. And then Dad would take us to school in a sled. Well, he'd have to be out in the open. But Mother would heat rocks in the oven and then wrap them up in a sack and put them at our feet, and then we'd be covered up all the way. So we didn't experience any of the cold, and poor Dad was out facing the wind and whatnot and having to drive us to school.
How far away was the school from your home?
About a mile, maybe a little bit more than a mile. But I think he went cross country when the snow was on the ground, and so it wasn't quite that far. But otherwise we would walk, if it was halfway decent. I remember one time Dad was sick, and it was about 30 below zero. And my brother and I just wanted to go to school. I didn't want to stay home no matter what. So my brother and I walked to school. We're almost there, and I said, I can't walk anymore. I'm free. My feet are frozen. And then my brother was younger, but he had more common sense than I did, because he said, well, Dad always said you don't sit down when you get cold. You have to keep moving. So he kept moving, and he got me to school. I think I cried when I got there. It was because my feet would always be cold, and froze. I was really frostbitten then, but we made it.
How did you heat the school building?
Great big pot-belly stove. I'm sure it was with coal. I had the weirdest dream. We had this male teacher by first and second grade. And I had this weirdest dream. It must have been during those years because I've never forgotten it. I got to school, and there was our teacher. I don't know if I wanted to mention his name. In the middle of the furnace. And he, flames all around him, but he was still alive. How he got there, I don't know, but that was such a strange, wild dream, and I've never gotten it.
What subjects were you taught in school?
All the basics, reading, arithmetic, English, spelling was a big thing. Well, the first year, I missed about half of the school year, I think. And you remember, we couldn't even speak English when we got to school. We were speaking German at home, and we had to learn to speak English. And I missed, I would say, almost a fourth of the year because I had gotten measles, chicken pox, scarlet fever, and then mastoiditis, whooping cough. I think I had it all in 1 year. So I missed a lot of it. But yet, by the end of the school year, I was able to read books. I sometimes wonder how, first we had to learn the language. But I guess when you're young, you absorb it so much easier. But I'm always amazed. I don't remember how we did it or how that teacher did it, but we did. And spelling was one of my favorites.
What was your least favorite subject?
Probably math or arithmetic. At that time we called it arithmetic.
Were you a good student?
I guess so. For the most part anyway, they always said it was. And my grades, I've got my report card someplace in one of my albums. And then in spelling, in 7th grade, we always had these county contests. And a teacher entered me in the spelling contest. Well, the 7th grade, I got 2nd place in the county. And the guy that beat me was a relative of mine from the Eureka school, and then the county superintendent told my dad, she shouldn't feel so badly. The Eureka city schools weren't supposed to be in there. This was just supposed to be country schools. And so the next year he wasn't entered into that, and then I got 1st place. Got my blue ribbon in spelling. Weird things I remember.
Do you remember any more about the spelling bees? What they were like?
Well, there was an oral one, then you had to write, and then a written one too. And as soon as you finished writing, you're supposed to raise your hand. And same with math. And when on the math contest, I forgot to put my paper up. I was done long before anybody else was, but I didn't raise it up until some of them started waving their paper. Oh, I should do that too. But then it was too late.
Right. You mentioned that you were still speaking German when you got to school. Were there any children of other backgrounds or ethnicities in your school?
I think they're all German in our area. Yeah, there weren't any English. Well, then later on, there's a family that moved in, and they didn't speak any German. But I think that was after I had left the grade school. And of course, our teacher at the time, my 1st and 2nd grade teacher spoke German. 4th grade teacher did not. 3rd grade teacher, I don't remember. And the others all spoke German, but of course you weren't allowed to speak German in school then, you had to speak the English, which I think they should do now.
Were you disciplined for speaking German in school?
Not really, just told not to, and so we knew enough not to do that. Although I do have another member of our county superintendent coming to visit. He'd have to come and visit the country schools a couple of times a year. I don't know what grade it was in, 4th, 5th. So anyway, it was up at the blackboard, and I thought I was being funny and acting up on the blackboard with my back to the door, back to the teacher. All of a sudden I looked around, there was the county superintendent. Oh boy. But he didn't say anything, do anything, but I thought, oh wow, I was really acting stupidly and in front of him. But yeah, it's just some of the silly memories I do have.
What are your favorite memories about going to that grade school?
I think putting on the plays in the Christmas program.
Can you tell me about those?
Oh, everybody took part in the program. We'd sing the songs, and then later on we'd have plays, and I loved to be in the plays. But I don't remember much about, what we did or how we did it, but I do. And then they put up a stage, and they put curtains up in front, and all the parents and the neighboring parents would come in and watch the programs. It'd always be in the evening. We must have had some kind of light. I don't remember what kind of light we had, though. because there was no electricity. I don't know what lit up the place. In our church, country church, we had these what they call gasoline lamps. You know, they had up in the ceiling, and they. But school, I can't remember what kind of lighting we had.
Do you remember any of the parts that you played?
No, not at all. I don't. No, that's too long ago.
Did you celebrate any other holidays in school? Like Valentine's Day?
Well, yeah, always been Valentine boxes for everybody, and we could order these packet of Valentines from either Sears or Montgomery's for practically nothing, and you'd have a Valentine for everybody. And I don't think we did anything else. Well, Thanksgiving, but that was just usually a simple little program. But I don't remember what we did there either.
How about Halloween? Did you celebrate that in school?
No, I have no memory of doing anything for Halloween. You would think we would have, but my dad would always talk about what they did when they were young. How they would put a hay rake on top of the barn and tip toilets and things like that. But in school we didn't do much of anything, and I don't think I couldn't get out to where I could do any mischief because we lived on the farm. But Dad said they went around, they did all kinds of things on Halloween. How they got that hay rake up on the barn rooftop, I don't know.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about your grade school?
My grade school? Well, when I think of it now, where they've got all these computers, they've got all this equipment, and some kids can't read, they can't add 2 and 3 and things like this. We had one wall map, one big globe, and one bookcase full of books, and that's all that we had. Well, we could get some from the county library. But I mean, basically, I think we got as good an education as some do now. How they teachers did it, I don't know. But they stressed, of course, your math, spelling, reading, writing. Still can't write today, but that's all right. My handwriting's getting worse as I get older.
Do you remember any of the books your school had?
No. Well, well, yeah. I remember reading Uncle Tom's Cabin when I was in the 5th grade. They must have been from the school library, because I know we didn't go to a public library.
Did you read a lot?
If I get a good book, I'd read with kerosene lamp until sometimes 2, 3 at night.
Do you remember your favorite book?
Uncle Tom's Cabin was one of them, and then Gone with the Wind, probably the other one.
Okay.
The others I don't remember. And I used to, I know what else I used to do, memorize. I love to memorize poems. And now I can't memorize 2 lines. But I remember memorizing the whole thing of Paul Revere's Ride. And, we'd have to recite some of the poems. But then I memorized some things that I didn't have to. The teacher didn't tell me I'd have to memorize them. And I did.
Do you remember any of them?
No, not now. I don't think I can even start Paul Revere's Ride.
How important was getting an education to your family?
Well, it was important that we go through the 8th grade, And then when I had graduated from that, I wanted to go to high school, but we lived 15 miles from town. There was no bus service. This was during the war years, and I was the oldest in the family, so they needed me on the farm to help take care of the other kids and whatever else chores had to be done. So I couldn't attend a regular high school, and I kept begging, for a high school education. And then we had heard about some other young girls in the neighborhood that had taken a high school education by correspondence through American School. And we checked into that, and then I had told my mother, I said, "Oh, I'd love to get a high school education so I can get into nursing." "Oh, well, if you want to be a nurse, you're going to get your high school education." So they allowed me to take my high school course at home. I had to do the whole thing on my own, and then I had to take a GED test at Northern University now. At that time, it was Northern State College. And so I was admitted to the School of Nursing and became an RN.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about your grade school?
Well, we always had a big day on picnic, last day of school. Parents would be there, they'd be playing baseball with the kids. It was always a big day. And of course, there were the normal disagreements among girls. There's some girls one girl in particular seemed to be jealous of whatever I did, so she tried to get some others to gang up on me, or anyway, came out to where she was alone at the last day of school, so it didn't work out.
Okay, you mentioned a lot of celebrations. Can you tell me a little bit about what holidays were like when you were growing up?
Well, Christmas, of course, was the big holiday. We'd always go to church on Christmas Eve because we have our program, and then come home and have our lunch, and then the next day, of course, was Christmas Day, and we'd go to church again. And we always had nice big meals. We got very few Christmas gifts. There wasn't a lot of money at that time. But I remember one Christmas Eve we were going to go to church for the program, and it was snowing and blowing, but Dad was bound determined we were going to go, and it was the church was 12 miles from our farm. So after we had driven about 3 miles and we had gotten stuck about 3 or 4 times, he said, "Well, I don't think we can make it. We'll just have to turn around and go back home." Well, naturally, we kids were disappointed, but we had our own little program. We said our little pieces, sang a little song, and got our little gift then that night. So it was a nice little, I remember that one. Yeah, and then, of course, the church programs, we always had a Christmas tree with real candles. Can you imagine that? We got our little sacks. We always had to say our little pieces, sing our little German songs, and that was about the only big celebration. Well, 4th of July was always a big day because Dad would take time off and take us to one of the towns that was celebrating the 4th of July, so we could either Long Lake, Loyola, or sometimes Eureka even.
And what were those celebrations like?
Well, they always had a parade. That was the big thing, was the parade. And then they would have all kinds of races, usually a baseball game. And carnivals. Yeah, they usually have a carnival too. We get a few rides. And as far as our food then, we'd buy some pop and a loaf of bread and a bologna, and that would be our lunch. And
do you remember what rides came with the carnival?
well, merry-go-round for one, because that one I liked. I did not like the Ferris wheel, and I don't remember any of the others. You know, I should have my notes here. My daughter had given me a book where I was supposed to write down all my history, and I've got them right there. It'd be much easier for me to remember that than trying to recall it from memory now.
You're doing a great job. Do you remember anything else about the 4th of July?
Well, let's see. There was a family that was known for their drinking. And I remember we were parked, must have been parked next to them, and Dad would come in the car. He says, "See, there they sit. They're drinking whatever they were drinking." I don't know. But I didn't think it was that important. But he thought that was awful because they had their kids with them and everything. So, yeah, let's get my notes. I don't know. Have you ever seen this book, To Our Children's Children: Preserving Family Histories for Generations to Come? One of my daughters gave me that, and so then I they have this list. It's full of questions, so I'd answer these questions, and then I put it on tape, cassette tape, so she has it, so that they can pass it on to the others. And so this is where I probably would have some. I have some notes on here that might be of interest, but I'm not sure. I'd have to go through if I didn't.
Okay. Well, we'll ask you about a few other holidays then. Did your family celebrate Easter?
Oh, yes.
Can you tell me about it?
Oh, yes. We always dyed eggs. We always had kuchen. You always went to church. You always got dressed up, your best clothes.
Did you get new clothes for Easter?
Usually. You got an Easter dress.
Were these handmade or store-bought?
No, usually Montgomery Ward's or Sears Roebuck. Although there was a store in Loyola that we would, where you could buy some clothes once in a while. How would we celebrate it otherwise? I don't know, other than I remember always dyeing eggs. We always had a lot of dyed eggs.
Did you have to make a nest for the Easter bunny?
You know, I don't know if we ever talked about the Easter Bunny when I was growing up. I don't remember that one.
Okay. Did lots of family come over for holidays?
Yeah. You always could expect somebody to be coming. Either uncles or aunts or grandparents. Grandparents would have to come with their children because they couldn't drive. My grandpa Job did not drive at all, and Grandpa Up was getting too old where he didn't drive anymore either, so.
How about other holidays growing up? Did your family celebrate Thanksgiving?
I'm sure we did, but I don't remember what we did. And I know Christmas, we celebrated 2 days. There was 2 days of Christmas. So we would still have company or go visiting on the 26th of December also. And then Easter Monday, too, was considered a holiday. So there'd be some visiting done then, too. But, funny thing, I can't remember anything about Thanksgiving.
All right. How about New Year's?
Well, yeah, we'd have these, what we'd call New Year shooters coming to the house, occasionally. They'd come in the yard, driving, shooting the guns in the air, and then they'd have to invite them in and then give them a little schnapsley, or usually it was just, all they wanted was a little schnapps. But I don't remember too much that happening, but it happened occasionally. But we ourselves didn't, do any special things that I can remember anyway.
All right. Did your family celebrate birthdays?
I don't remember a birthday party. I don't think we ever. I mean, we made, a note of it, and probably, but it's a funny thing, I don't remember anything about our birthdays either. Whether we did anything special or what, I just don't remember that either.
Okay.
I don't know if we did or not, I don't think so.
talking about your family a little bit, why don't we find out a little more about them? Can you tell me about your grandparents?
Yes. Let's see. Well, should we start with my great-grandparents, maybe?
Sure.
Because they're the... Okay, where are the... They came to America in, I believe, in 19... was it 19? Anyway, it's either late 1890 or early 1900s, because great-grandma died in 1902, and they said she died, they think she died of homesickness. And she's buried out in the pasture someplace, and I don't know where that is. I'd never asked my dad. My dad knew. And see, some of the sons were over here earlier, and then they had their parents brought over. Now, my brother feels that this is their wedding picture, because the way they were dressed, and that's a charcoal sketching, that these charcoal artists would come around and they would do charcoal sketching. So this is a copy of the original. And so great-grandpa was buried in the church cemetery, but when he died, there was a church there and they had a cemetery. But when she died, there wasn't any. And then my grandpa, which is...
And these are on your father's side?
Yeah, I'm talking about my father's side now. My grandpa came over much earlier because he was supposed to be conscripted into the army, Russian army, and somehow he got out of Russia, got on a ship somewhere, and stowed away. This legend is that he stowed away in a ship, came to Canada, worked in Canada for a year, and then when by that time either his parents or some other brothers had come to the United States, and then he came down to South Dakota. And then and I often wondered, how did these two get together, because their names are so different. And anyway, looking back on their where they homesteaded, they were neighbors. So I said, that's how they got together. And my grandma worked in a cafe in Ipswich. And I think when she was 13 years old, and that's where she learned to speak English. Then, now she could go to English church services and understand it. Grandpa never could understand it. But Grandma, and she wrote her little an autobiography for us in German, and then my brother translated it in English. And so I have that, but that's also going to be in Homer Rudolph's book. I think I sent it to him anyway. I think he's got it in there. And this man, he was a quiet, very tall man, my grandpa. Always had his mustache. But he read so much. He was always reading newspapers, German books. Of course, they always had to be German newspapers. And he apparently loved to get his name in the paper because in researching for my cemetery book that we did, I found out, going through these old newspapers, he would, every time he'd come to Eureka to see the dentist or something, he'd stop in at the newspaper office and tell him that he was there to see the dentist. So he'd get his name in the paper, I think, is what it was. And then another time he stopped in there to say, just to renew his subscription to the German newspaper, then he said he just cannot be without this newspaper, he's got to have it. And so, anyway, I have several referrals, found several articles in these old German newspapers where he had been there to report that he was in Eureka. And I found it kind of amusing because I thought, well, he's such a quiet-spoken man, he'd never, but evidently he liked to read about it. Let's see. I'm getting off the subject here, I guess. Yeah, this is what I wrote then for our family history, family reunion last year, or 2 years ago. Grandpa Ludwig Job appeared to be a quiet, soft-spoken man, very tall and straight, always had a mustache. In reading the old German newspapers, I discovered that Grandpa loved to see his name in the paper. It seemed whenever he came to Eureka, he would stop in the newspaper office. He would get his name in the paper. In one visit, he paid for the subscription and remarked that he could not be without the paper. Then in 1918, Adam Haug and Ludwig Joke from the Loyola area were in Eureka last Wednesday, visited in the office where it was learned that Ludwig saw the dentist. P.W. Trike, where he had to have his dentures adjusted. Another time, Ludwig Joke from the Loyola area last Friday came to Eureka after being in Hosmer. He and Mrs. Joke visited the in-laws where the mother-in-law, Mrs. Johannes Kranzler, who is very ill and there is little hope for her recovery. Ludwig came down with a toothache and thus came to Eureka to see the dentist. And also visited the newspaper people. It doesn't say how he traveled. And because I know he didn't drive a car, so did he go by horse and buggy at that time? In 1918, I wouldn't think so. Must have had somebody else drive him, probably one of the boys, like my dad or somebody. Because my dad said, when they bought a car, and they said, okay, now you have to drive it. So they had him drive until he got to the big hill. He had to go downhill. And he got panicky. He's ho, 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 ho. And the car wouldn't slow down. And he said, when he came home, he said, so, that's it. He wouldn't drive anymore. I remember being, when they lived in Loyola, then they moved into Loyola after my parents married. And he always had this car in the garage, but I don't think he ever drove it. Anyway, those are just some of the things about Grandpa that I thought were kind of unique and funny because I had no idea that he would do this. And then my grandpa or should I stay with Job?
Let me ask you a couple of questions about him. Mm-hmm. How close did they live when you were growing up?
Well, they lived in Loyola, which was 15 miles from our farm.
Did you get to visit them often?
Oh, yes. We visited them quite often. And they, at that time, people retired very young. And so they lived in Loyola. They had this little house, and I remember coming to town on Saturday nights, and they would always be sitting on the back porch watching everybody coming into town and waiting for us to stop in. And Grandma always had peppermint candy on hand. And my Grandma Job was a little rotund. She just loved to eat, apparently. And, let's see. Yeah, you can tell on here already. She's quite heavy. Anyway, she couldn't stand it when I was so thin. So when I was in nursing school and I worked in the diet kitchen, I gained about 6 pounds those few weeks. I worked in the diet kitchen. I came home and she said, oh, you look so good. She thought that was so great that I had gained weight. Okay.
Did you ever stay with them?
Oh, overnight I did. I'd come home from nursing school once in a while. I probably stayed overnight until my parents came and got me. But other than that, at least I don't remember unless when I was younger, that I don't remember. And I remember Grandma coming out and gathering blood when they butchered pigs for blood sausage. Oh, that was gross.
Did your entire extended family come to help with sausage and butchering?
No, the neighbors usually helped each other out. We only had one uncle living close by, so they probably helped. I don't remember, but I know usually it was the neighborhood thing when somebody would butcher and then, they would come and help each other out. But this one time I remember Grandma came out from the town. She wanted to get some blood for blood sausage. She brought it in the house. She kept stirring and stirring. I couldn't believe anybody would eat that stuff. I still can't eat it to this day.
What else do you remember about this set of grandparents?
Well, oh gosh. I should remember a lot of things, but right offhand now, my mind's a blank as to what I know they retired young, and then when Grandpa got sick, he refused to go to the hospital, and he died at home then of pneumonia. But he was, I think, 87 years old at the time, so he just didn't. I guess he felt he didn't need to go to the hospital. He was ready. And then,
How old were you when he died?
Oh, well, I was married by that time and had one or two children, so I must have been 25, maybe 20. I never tried figuring that out, what year it was, yeah. And then Grandma lived a few years longer. And then that's when we finally got smart, and somebody asked her about writing her little story, how she grew up and what she remembered of her young days. And then she wrote this, and I have that. If you want to get at it later, we can.
Okay.
Or if we're going to do it now, I think I can find it.
We'll look at it a little later.
Okay.
All right. Why don't you tell me about your other grandparents?
Well, all I know is they had a big family. They have, what is it? 12 children. I think it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 live, but I think 3 or 4 of them died. And I thought, well, all they did was have children and work on the farm. Found out when I was going through these old newspapers, Grandpa and another man from the neighborhood went to Nebraska to buy a stallion, a very special stallion, so they could have it and service, the horses in the neighborhood. I never thought he got out of the area. And then another thing, this was I believe in 1916, they and 3 other couples. Oh, I'm sorry. These are my grandparents. Up. They and 3 other couples took the train to Freeman. Yeah, I believe it was Freeman, South Dakota, to visit relatives. And then they took the train to Huron to the state fair. And that just amazed me because I thought, gee, they never did anything for fun or got away from home or anything like that. But they did spend a day at the state fair, then got on the train and came home again.
And did you visit them often?
Yeah, we visited them ever so often. It's, they live far away, about 25 miles away from where we grew up. That was a long drive. And so we would visit them, and Grandma, she had all these children, and most of them had families and lived right around where they lived, and we'd all be there for either Sunday dinner or how she did it, I don't know. She always had food for everybody. And my poor Grandpa, he could never ask for anything. If he wanted something, he'd stand up at the end of the table and reach all the way across to get it. Yeah, they were amazing how they were able to do that. I just don't understand it, but I have trouble fixing food for 4 people now. They did for so many, and some of these brothers were kind of, they were a little bit. My mother says she remembers Grandpa get them all cleaned up for Sunday church. Go outside and come in. Had black dirt all over their face. They thought that was so funny. She'd have to start all over again.
aunts and uncles on this side of the family?
Yeah. Let's see here. Probably Alma, the younger one, where she there, and then Ellen probably was one of my, I shouldn't say one of my favorite uncles, but he probably was because he was in the service and I don't know, we got kind of close. Edmund was the one that well, he let me fall out of the buggy too when I was little. He was supposed to babysit me, and he was busy singing, and he forgot all about me, and until I had landed on the floor or on the ground outside, and then anyway, my mom said that he let me fall out of the buggy. But this Edmund was the one that always teased me, so I didn't like him so well when I was young. Instead of calling me Selma, he'd call me Samuel, or Selma in German. And Helen was close to me when she left and went to Washington, so she'd always write me letters. So I kind of appreciated that. And the others were all, they're all fine uncles, great uncles, but it wasn't that close to. And then now I've got these two baptismal certificates up here. This is Pauline number 2. The first one is Pauline number 1. She died at age 3. And then a couple of years later, they had another daughter, and they named her Pauline also. And she's the second one up there, Pauline number 2. And this Pauline number 2 then, I don't know what the younger one died of, the first one died of, but the Pauline number 2 then had polio. And she was kind of handicapped on one side, and it all affected her brain, plus her arm and leg and that. So she was always, Grandma kept her at home as long as she could, but pretty soon she'd get convulsions every so often, and then they finally took her to the school at Redfield, and she was down there for many years, and then they brought her up here to the nursing home. Then she died in the nursing home. But those are the two Paulines. That's why I kind of treasure these two things, because let's see. What else about these? Just that they had it. And this son of theirs, Otto, he was trying for their record as far as children. I think he had 11 or 12 also. Had a big family. None of the others had real big families. Well, Edmund had 5 children. So that's about, and then when Grandma and Grandpa moved to town, I know I would stay with them once in a while, just kind of help Grandma, and especially when Ellen was going to be coming home from the service for a furlough, and then so I could visit with him. And so.
Were you close to any of your cousins on that side of the family?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, quite a few of them. Yeah.
Did you have a favorite one?
Well, growing up, Wilma Knapp was probably, because she was closest to my age, and she would have been the daughter of John. This one. We got into trouble one time. We were visiting at their place, and she and I were about 6, 7 years old. We sat in the car, we played around in the car. All of a sudden, we must have pulled a handle or some kind. Car started going down the hill a little bit, and we were in there heading right for the outdoor toilet. We screamed. I don't know, I can't remember, did somebody come out and run out and was able to stop the car? Anyway, it was moving very slowly, but we didn't. So I remember that.
Did you get disciplined for that?
I think we got a little scolding for even getting into the car. For one thing, we weren't supposed to be in the car.
All right. How about your other side of the family? Were you close to aunts and uncles on that side?
On the Job side?
Yeah.
Yes. I think to just about everybody. Because this just only lived a quarter mile from me, from where I grew up. So they had, I had we cousins were always close. And then these were older, but as I got older, I became, fairly close to them. And this aunt had such a big family too, about 11 children, I think. And lost track of a lot of them. Well, now the last few years, we had kind of gotten together again when I think her birthday, and then when she died, and then I got to reacquainted with some of the cousins again. And then this lady, her husband was a postmaster at Roscoe, and now I was very close to one of their daughters, the same age as I am, so we're still close. She lived to be 2 months shy of 106. She was 102, I think, or 103 when she died. And this is the one that I showed you earlier that celebrated her 105th birthday now in February 2nd. Mine is sharp as a tack. Still writes letters. I sent her birthday cards, so she sent me a thank you note and all this. She's just amazing. And then when we visited her last summer, and she got up off the chair to greet us and didn't need a walker or a cane or anything, better than I'm doing. Anyway, we were close. Still closer. We will hope to see her this summer now when we have our family reunion in a few weeks.
All right, you were going to tell us a story about your grandmother?
Yes, she said, when she was working at the Ipswich Cafe, that's where she learned to speak English. First year or so, she got paid 50 cents a week. A week or a month? No, I don't remember. Anyway, she got paid 50 cents, and then later on she was raised to $1. No, that was a month, 50 cents a month. And that helped pay for some of their expenses because their crops were so bad that year. They didn't have any crops, so she had to go to work at the cafe to help the family. And as I had told you earlier, my grandpa I didn't realize he was a jokester. But on the 1st of May, he called over to my grandma and said, "Get your apron ready. There's a nest full of eggs at the haystack." And I don't remember if they were chicken eggs or duck eggs or whatever. So she was almost over the haystack. And then in German he said, "Am 1. Mai schickt mir der Esel ins Heu," which means the 1st of May. It doesn't rhyme in English when I translate it literally. And it's not funny then either. But anyway, he says, 1st of May, you send the donkey to the hay. And Grandma was not very happy, wasn't a very happy camper with that remark. I don't know what she said or what she did, but I can just about imagine she maybe said a few words.
Okay.
And then I thought it was something I was going to tell you about my grandpa and grandma up, but now I don't remember what that was. So.
Do you have any other stories you'd like to share about your grandparents?
Not really. I know Grandpa Up died rather young. He was only 76. He died of asthma. And then Grandma lived alone for quite a few years. So I'd spend I was married at the time, but I tried to help her, go visit her as often as I could because she lived right here in town. No, right offhand now I can't think of anything else, yeah.
Right. Well then, can you please tell us about your father?
Yeah, he went to school up to the 3rd grade. Of course, the beginning of the school year, he had to help on the farm. And then at the end of the school year, the farming work started. So he had really very little education. So, but what happened, why he quit in the third grade, they had a nice wet snowstorm, and they were throwing snowballs outside. And Dad had a nice big snowball made, ready to heave. Just then the teacher opened the door and he hit her splat on the face. He ran home and he never went back to school. That was the end of his education. And yet he did okay. I mean, he kept this, he was a clerk for a school district, and he, had to do all his business, on the farm. He paid everything by cash. If he had money to pay for it, he'd buy it, and if not, you don't buy it. And my mother went to school up to 5th grade, and the teachers that they had at that time had very little education. So, and Mother was pretty good in math, and so she'd be through with her book, and then the teacher would put her back at the beginning of the book again, because she didn't know any more math than what she was teaching Mom. So Grandpa said, well, if she can't teach you anything, you can stay home. So that was the end of her education. And then when I, said I wanted an education because I wanted to be a nurse, and then Mom said, well, if you want to be a nurse, you're going to get your high school, because I always wanted to do that, and I never had the chance. So, and she was a pretty good friend of Dr. Gurdis' daughter, Maud. Maud later became a doctor, and Maud would always come out with Dr. Gurdis whenever he would come out and visit, see somebody in the family. Maud would come along, and so she and Mom became pretty good friends, and well, Maud got the education Mom didn't, so. This Dr. Gurdis was a wonderful, common sense man. I don't know if you had anybody talk about him. He was born in Germany. He came to Eureka as a doctor and was here for many, many years until 1934, I think, or 32, 30, somewhere. Anyway, but he was crude. He had his German, some of these Germans, are kind of, well, I don't want to denigrate my heritage, but, they sometimes weren't the most, what would I say, finesse, saying things nicely. Anyway, I guess one of my uncles, well, in fact, it was Ellen, my favorite one, had gotten very sick. They called Dr. Gurdis out there. He did what he could, and the next morning Dr. Gurdis called out. And in German he said, "Has that kid croaked yet?" In other words, is just a kalt schon verrückt? And my mom tells me that now, because they thought that was so, even as much as they loved him, but, he did have this down-to-earth language, you could call it probably. Okay. That's the end of my parents' education that I know.
You talked about Dr. Gurdis. Were there other doctors in the area?
Not at that time. He came in the 1800s. There's a good story about him in our Jubilee book. And he was I think he was the only doctor. There was a chiropractor, and there was also a dentist, but as far as a medical doctor, I think he was the only doctor until the 30s.
Now, you mentioned earlier that I think it was your first grade year you came down with all these different ailments. Did you go to the doctor for those?
Well, and see, I lived in the Loyola area, and we had a nurse over there. And then she later married the doctor that was there too. Anyway, they would come out and they would take care of me. And then I developed mastoiditis, and Dad had to take me in and had the ear lance. That was a complication of the scarlet fever.
All right, you were telling us about when you were sick as a child?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I remember when I got the earache, how severe that was. Practically crawling up the bed in the walls because it was so painful until they got me to the doctor. And otherwise, the doctor would come out and do what they could. There wasn't much you could do for any of those community, except we were quarantined, for so many weeks. And at that time, nobody could come to the house, and you couldn't go anywhere. But I suppose in the first grade, before we were isolated, we didn't. And then once something got into the school, why it just spread. And I must have picked up everything that was there. Why, I don't know. Mumps, I didn't. Never did get mumps. Everybody else had mumps, but I didn't.
So how often did you and your family go to a doctor?
Just when we needed to. There's no exams or anything like that. If someone was sick, we wouldn't hesitate to either call them out. They would make house calls out the farm. Dr. Lundquist and his wife Eidlet, who was a nurse. She had been a nurse in the First World War overseas. And then she practiced alone for a while until this Dr. Lundquist came to Leola, and then they two got married. Anyway, we called her our doctor, even though she was an RN. And, whenever we needed them, they'd call them. And their parents wouldn't wait too long. They were not reluctant to go to a doctor at all.
Did your parents have any home remedies for illnesses?
Oh, yeah. Dad had peppermint drops. I think they were called peppermint drops. Peppermint drops? Still don't like mint. Every time we get a stomach ache or something, here comes the peppermint. And, another thing with earache, he would blow smoke into your ear. And had toothache, a clove in the side of your mouth. So those are just some of the home remedies that they had. And other than that, I don't remember anymore.
All right. How often did you visit a dentist?
When we got a toothache.
Was there one nearby?
We had to come to Eureka at that time.
How about an optometrist?
Went to Aberdeen for that because they discovered my nearsightedness when I was in the 4th grade, so went to Dr. Rudolph at Aberdeen.
How did they discover your nearsightedness?
Teacher could tell. I had to sit up close to the blackboard to see. And she told my parents about it, and of course they took me to the doctor. And